Usually we live in this comfort zone that we call civilization, culture, all sorts of imagination. And it is another layer of habits, of beliefs, mental habits, mental beliefs. Most of it have nothing to do with how things really are. It's just the way we fancy things. Some people say there is a collective hallucination. As this collective hallucination works well, we keep holding it. We are happy in hallucinating together. Once allow us to keep going on.
Hello, fellow science lovers. I had once again the great pleasure to talk with Vinicius Romanini. He's about to publish a new book on semiotics this year. In this conversation, we talk about the new developments, and especially we talk about the concept of semiostasis. So, without further ado, here's the conversation. Maybe we start with a very general question, sort of, how would you summarize your work? What have you accomplished or done? Like, how would you summarize this work?
Well, we never accomplished completely, but at this point, the way I maybe understand of what I've been trying to do for the last 20, 25 years is to bring a epistemological view of communication. So that's my field of research. I'm a social scientist and specialize in communication. So I'm trying to understand communication as a semiotic phenomenon. And we can do that using Peirce's theory of science for sure, because he thinks that semiosis and communication are quite related, even synonymous. And so my final goal in this thesis is to define communication from a semiotic perspective. That means using Peirce's grammar, because when we talk about communication, it is a logical process. So we are sharing information in a community. That means that we must understand what's going on. And semiotic gives us a tool. And from understanding Peirce's more fundamental discipline of grammar, the grammar of science, we can build a logical relations among classes of science, and then try to find out how critical logic can maybe understand the process of meaning building in society, how we build meaning, how we share our thoughts, and how we do that in a controlled fashion, and how later on we develop a pragmatic notion of action, self-controlled action based on collective thoughts that are shared and inspire us to live together, act together as a community. So it's a very broad project. And I think I found in Peirce's theory of science a very important basis for trying to deliver this goal.
So the main concept, or maybe the most fundamental concept, is communication. So if I understand right, the reality, the most fundamental nature of reality, or the whole of reality, could be conceptualized as communication.
Perfect. So what I'm saying is that we live in a participatory universe, and we not only participate among ourselves, those who share meaning, but we participate in reality. So there is a relation between us and the environment, the cosmos. And so there is not a neat cut. So you do not cut your thoughts and reality with an axe. So your thoughts are distributed, and we share our thoughts. We participate in a collective mind. Peirce usually calls this co-mind, commons, and this involves some sort of participation in the reality that is around us. And That's something that usually in Occidental philosophy is not very well accepted because we are very fond of our individual subjectivity, Cartesian idea that the mind is something and then matter or the body is something different. But Peirce's continuity or Peirce's cynicism, which is his doctrine of continuity, advocates that there is not a clear cut between our minds and what we thought of, the objects that we think. So, this is when we think about communication in Peirce's doctrine of science, we must bring along with this a metaphysical theory of reality in which a participatory universe is at play.
Yeah, I think it's easy, or I don't know, easy, but we can conceptualize this communication like when we act and we interact with our environment, we can sort of think that as a communication with the environment, like we internalize information about the environment and we are in a communication or relationship. And that is something that, is quite easy to understand. But what is more difficult to understand is how you explain very mechanical action as a communication. So could you give an example of a sort of very mechanical action, how that is conceptualized as communication?
Yes, it has to do with legiscience or the way we understand the laws or the patterns or habits. When we talk about mechanical transmission of information, mechanical action, what we are talking about is there is a very strict law-like habit governing what's going on. So if we think about the laws of nature, we know that they are very predictable because they govern the events, what happens. And we know we can predict what's going to happen because the laws that govern those events are very strict. So there is a gradation. So usually in philosophy, we say there are the laws of nature, which are for good. So we must accept them as a given. And then there are our subjective or social habits, and they are open. We have free will, and we can act very freely. Our subjective can express itself because those laws are not so strict that we are totally involved in these strict habits. So what I'm saying is that there is a gradation. Actually, the laws of nature are not so law-like as we usually think of. So there is novelty, there is freshness, there is something going on in the nature that brings about creativity. So we see that nature is creative because it's always changing in bringing novelty to the scene. And we ourselves, we are learning from those habits. And that's the interesting thing when we try to understand the laws that govern the environment around us. And we try to build hypotheses, conjectures that will internalize in our minds some sort of representation of those law-like phenomena. So when I talk about mechanical action, what I'm saying is that there are, for all pragmatic purposes, we can express those mechanical actions are very strictly law governed. But this is just a way of saying it. That's not what's happening in the deepest if we analyze even law-like phenomena, we'll find out that there's a lot of interesting things going on that actually are not as mechanical as necessitarianists would say or determinists would say. So we probably should relativize. There is some what is mechanical, because even mechanical action is not as mechanical as we usually think of.
What do you mean by that?
Because there's always some the possibility or something unexpected happen. Even when you drive your car, you go to the supermarket. So you cannot believe that there is a totally determined path, or your car will work exactly as determined by the laws of the builder of your car. So something might happen between your house and the supermarket that could not be predicted or described in advance. So novelty comes into play, and this is something that that is part of reality. So mechanical action is a way of describing some level of predictability that is actually not as predictable as we usually to think we used to think of. So that's what I'm saying. There's much more novelty in our life than we in the past would admit. So mechanical action is not as mechanical as we in the past, or the theories of the past, deterministic, positivistic, physicistic, materialistic doctrines would describe. If you want to bring up a name, like I don't know if you're aware of Prigogine, Ilya Prigogine,
Yeah.
a Nobel Prize chemist, and he wrote a lot about how creativity is present in chemical reactions. So there's novelty, creativity, and probabilities are fundamental in the laws of nature. And probabilities are something that go to very law-like probabilities or very loose probabilities. Some phenomena are so loose in their probabilities that they behave like very sensitive and far from equilibrium systems that we cannot predict their behavior. So we must, in a semiotic theory of reality, we must encompass both extremum. We have a extremum which is everything is creativity and mind-like freshness, originality. The other extremum is everything is law-like, very strict, matter-like, mechanistic. But actually, in reality, we're sort of in the middle way between those extrema. So no mechanical phenomena, when we observe it, is totally determined or totally open to novelty. There's always a mixture, and that's the interplay of semiosis. How those mixtures of totally law-like phenomena and totally fresh, original. So if we want to put versus categories, a very thirdness that is very strict and crystallized, and a firstness that is completely open. So from those two extreme, how do we put systems that are real? So ourselves, our society, the universe. So everything is in the middle. Nothing is at the extreme.
Yeah, I remember that Peirce said that he was a practicing scientist. He was very familiar with empirical science like physics or chemistry. And he knew that when we measure things, there's always
Exactly.
sort of fluctuation in that. And that is something that, nowadays we say, well, that's a human measurement error, and that's the cause of that error. But Peirce says that maybe it's fluctuating there, and we're measuring that fluctuation.
Exactly.
So this is sort of, the causality isn't fully determined, as you said, but there is always this probability function or normal distribution. Like normally in most of the case we we presume that this is going to be in that direction, but in some extreme cases there may be slight deviation from these physical laws.
Okay, you said it right, because it is this probability distribution that it is on the basis of reality. So we are in a
Vagueness.
exactly. So we are in a territory or a place in those probability distribution in which things happen to be more law-like, but sometimes we might slip to a very different universe. So we must go to a place where things get very fuzzy and very different from what we were expecting. And we cannot fully predict when we are going to be in which places. So there's this kind of attractor that usually put us normally in this situation, but an attractor is not a deterministic figure. So an attractor has always the possibility of deviance. So it might find a bifurcation. So it just deviates from the normality, and you never happens when this break of habit will happen with precision. So it's something that is open. That's what the future is about. So we are in an open future.
Yeah, that's very nicely put, like attractor, because that gives sort of the idea that this is not a fixed static system, but a dynamic system with attractors, and they may change, and they are in a dynamic movement, and then is a very important thing that I think is easy to grasp is this gradation, and with the concept of habit, like there are different kinds of habits with different kinds of fixation or dynamism. Like physical laws, which are habits, are very, as you said, they are not so volatile. They are not changing so quickly. But then there are biological habits, like in evolution, which are still pretty stiff, but they do change much more quickly than physical laws. And then there are cultural laws, like culture, which is their habits, our cultural habits. They do change much more quickly than biological laws, but still it may take many generations. And then there's, of course, our personal habits, which may change like on a daily basis. So this is the gradation. It's a continuum of habits, but there is no clear cut.
Well, very well put. So people usually say that, well, if you go to let's say down on the ladder of evolution and down the ladder of biological system complexity, and some people describe like insects or worms, so those basic forms of life, as having no mind. And I think that's not the right way to put it. It's not that they don't have the mind. Actually, they are participating in a universe in which most of their mind is connected with the mind of the laws of the universe. So they have to act only on some phases of the semiotic process in which action is needed to survive, to preserve, to reproduce. But they have the same structure, logical structure, as our lives. The fact that they don't have a social life or imagination, or it simply means that they in evolution, their strategy is to feed themselves into the laws or the minds of the universe, and they're acting only on the perception action level or on the experiential level. So they are much more in energy, less consumption. So they don't have to consume so much energy from the environment, because they don't have to build another universe in their minds. They don't have to build theories. They don't have to build society, culture, civilization. So they're much more simple and very well adapted, because they go with the mind of the nature. That doesn't mean that they don't have a mind. It means that most of their mind is in the mind of the universe. They are acting only on a small fraction of semiotic process, usually perception action. We uh, we are we as human beings, we have another evolutionary strategy. We don't say that ours is best or worse than theirs. It's just another path. So what we are doing is that we are building universes in our minds and in our relations and in our society and culture, and those universes, they are making habits, conjectures, hypotheses, inductions. And so we are building another layer of habits. So we are detached from the habits of nature. At some point, we must represent those habits in our own minds or in our social minds so that we survive in those habits that govern nature. But we have built this very energy consumption strategy of building a generative model, a semiotic model of the universe, of the environment, and we live within this shared mind or the co-mind of the commons, that is the collective mind that connects us in a community. And this is another layer with the laws of nature. So there's no much difference between the mind of an insect, of a worm, and our minds. It's just a different strategy of reproduction and survival. We all process the same levels of semiotic semiosis. We're all participating in the same reality, but we have chosen different degree of habit building, of habit creation, and now we can make totally imaginary universe, and at some point even contrast our the way we imagine the universe and the reality that is out of our fancy or imagination. And now we have to put them in some sort of confrontation, and that's what scientific methodology is about. It's about to adjusting our levels of habitual representation to the levels of habitual semiosis that goes on in the universe.
Yeah, could you say maybe the same thing like this, that there is this sort of the semiosis of the universe, or the basic semiosis. I don't know if this is good language, but sort of the basic semiosis, and then the ants or some plants or some, lower level or lower phase semiotic organism is building sort of a smaller, like if this is the so it's building like a smaller this is maybe the concept of semiostasis, like a
Perfect.
smaller semiostasis, but humans build a much larger semiostasis based on this universal semiosis.
Yes, that's it. We're going up in the ladder of abstraction. So most of lower level organisms, they have chosen in their evolutionary path not to build so much abstraction. So they are very connected with the environment. So that's why their semiosis goes on the action perception semiosis or semiostasis. They are governing in this very low level, low energy consumption semiosis. We are building layers and layers of abstraction and complexity. And so in biosemiosis, we call this the umwelt. Our umwelt is much more complex, and there are much more layers of complexity in our umwelt. So that means that there are much more risk in our way of behaving in the environment, because we are much more detached from the environment. And in some sense, there is some friction, there's some entropy going on between the habits of our culture and the habits, natural habits, the laws of nature. And this friction is something that at some point must be resolved, because this friction is bringing heat to our planet. So at some point, this friction must be resolved. We must lower down the level of energy consumption and entropy production. And maybe we are going to trying to find ways of living or ways of building our civilization that is more attuned with the laws of natures. So we lower down the friction between civilization and nature, and we will have to find a way of bringing more harmony between the culture, the way we think of the world, and the way the nature processes information. And I think this is what we call sustainability. When we talk about a sustainable future, from a semiotic point of view, sustainability or sustainable action is actually action that is more attuned with the laws of nature or how nature governs reality.
Yeah, and sustainable action is synonymous with rational action in this framework. That's
perfect.
Maybe.
I like it. I like the idea.
Yeah. Okay. But it's very But so the other animals are sort of, they are not building as developed and complex sign systems in their own umwelt or in their own bubble of semiosis or in their semiostatic systems, but humans go all the way to the most abstract level of building a universe inside a universe, sort of. And in this way, man is a microcosmos.
Exactly.
Cosmos.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's what men or humans, they intend to build a representation of reality, a full representation of reality. And by doing so, they are building imaginary universes. So the way when we see the universe, actually we are seeing a representation of the universe, how the universe appears to us. So there is no guarantee that the way we see things, the way we represent things are actually how things are. So I'm not advocating here things are as they are, or so. I'm not advocating a Kantian thing as such or things in themselves. What I'm saying is that every species has a particular set of perceptive apparatus, and we observe part of the universe. We observe part of reality. But since that's all we have in our minds, we fancy or we imagine the rest of it out of what is given. So lots of what we think the universe is just how, in our evolutionary way of thinking, how we have represented to ourselves how the universe might be. So those are all, most of them are just conjectures, and the science has learned about during the time how those theories or conjectures must be dropped at some point when we go into a further level of knowledge. So we are always trying to filter off mistakes, errors, but at doing that, we always bringing into the system new errors and new mistakes. You see, so we are letting go old mistakes and errors, but at the same time, we always putting into our conjectures and hypotheses new mistakes that in the future will have to be criticized. So this is a continuous process, and probably we'll never get a full representation of the universe because we are always particular minds. Even if we work together as scientific teams, there's no possibility of a numerable quantity of minds working together to have a full representation of reality. So it's not in our powers to have this total true representation of reality, because our perceptive apparatus does not gather all the information that is around us. We filter off most of the information, and we get only the information usually that confirms our hypothesis. So when we're doing representation, most of the time we're looking for information, impressions of senses that confirm our previous conjectures of previous predictions or hypotheses. So we're generating continuously our own impressions that will confirm our predictions. So this put us in a very odd position, because we are always in a bubble of conjectures that try to confirm itself, and we only drop those beliefs or those systems of beliefs when nature forces us to do. So there's not something that we're free, or we'll do it in our own will. Only when nature says, well, sorry, that's not how things are. Then we have this irritation that we call doubt. We got irritated with nature and say, okay, I give up. I'll try to do some new conjectures, new hypotheses, because there's no way to get around those irritations unless I change my set of beliefs. But we only do that when irritation is strong enough to put us in discomfort. Usually we live in this comfort zone that we call civilization, culture, all sorts of imagination. And it is another layer of habits, of beliefs, mental habits, mental beliefs, that most of it have nothing to do with how things really are. It's just the way we fancy things. Some people say there is a collective hallucination. It works. As this collective hallucination works well, we keep holding it. We are happy in hallucinating together. Once it allow us to keep going on.
Yeah, this is the I agree that it's only when the reality, when the second it hits you in the face,
Exactly.
that you
Change
change your habits. Yeah, but you may disagree with me on this one, but I think that this capability of humans to construct a universe inside of a universe, and to develop arguments, the most complex science, allows us to access something, maybe I could say the logic of reality, or the most fundamental layers of reality, which is not accessible to other animals. And whereas other animals are always adaptive to their immediate environment, although our environment is also immediate and very limited. This is just one planet in a vast universe, but nevertheless we can access or think about or represent through mathematics or through diagrams some logical forms that are I would say that are present in the whole universe. So in that sense, we can sort of gain access outside of this Umwelt of ours and outside of these perceptions and culture of ours to something almost eternal, I would say.
Yeah, well, Percy himself says that. I agree with you, because Percy says that that's a hope. So that's not something that you must be certain of, but that's a hope that if there's anything that put us above animal life, would be this aesthetical sense that we are in synchrony with something bigger than ourselves. And Percy calls it the admirable in itself. So that is a aesthetical feeling, and it comes out of this sense of a sort of harmony. But all this is a very what brings the ultimate purpose to our lives. There is some sort of religious thought involved in this kind of idea, and Peirce advocates that, because otherwise it's just evolution, and it's just based on natural selection. And as he was very aware of Darwinian evolution, he also criticized the way Darwinian evolution didn't open doors for purpose in life. So when he talks about evolutionary love, he's talking about something that is purpose-like, something that put us in synchrony with something that it is much larger than we can actually imagine or think of. And this hope that there is this fundamental purpose of harmony between us and the universe is what brings semiosis to this metaphysical status of putting us in connection with a greater, a grand view of the cosmos, in which maybe God might be a place.
Yeah, I think that's very important, because it leads to a sort of, everything becomes very contingent and relativist in the last sense, if we just think that, yeah, we can participate with the habits of Gaia, or like habits of Earth, and that's it. But in Peirce is saying that no, we can participate with the telos of the universe.
Exactly.
Like,
well, it
doesn't get any more general than that.
Yeah, he does say that, but he also says that this is a hope that animates us.
Yeah.
That is not something that must be a dogma. So this is something that we entertain, we muse about this, and we are happy of having this idea, because it put us our particular purposes into a larger purpose. But this aesthetical connection between us and the cosmos is a way we would like our final purpose to be. It's much more of a hope than a actually a certitude. We cannot advocate that we are the chosen ones. No, we are the elected ones, and so God put us a finger on my forearm and said, "Well, go for it," because so those kind of thoughts, they're sometimes religious thought, slip into this kind of mechanistic idea that we have been chosen, just so nothing bad can happen to me because I have been chosen. So that's not how things work, and it is much more of a firstness or a statical feeling of participating in this wholeness than actually just enjoying being the son of God.
Yeah, but I would say, yeah, it's a hope. At the bottom, it's hope, but I would say it's a necessary hope for successful inquiry. But we use the term semiostasis a couple of times. Maybe that's one of the improvements or developments compared to a PhD, the concept of semiostasis. So what is semiostasis?
Yeah, you're right. If you want to understand semiostasis, the way I see it now is that we've been trying to develop how the sign relations allow us to describe semiosis. So we know that there are some aspects, and those aspects can be described in an order of determination, starting from the most basic ones, which are the immediate aspects, immediate object, immediate interpretant, towards the more complex ones. finishing up in the most complex of all aspects, which is the relation between the sign, dynamic, object, and the final interpretant. So we know that one of the axes of semiosis is the teleological axis of signification. So we know,
and just to say something, this determination of the aspects was the thing that Peirce tried to do, but never could find
exactly.
a solution that he was satisfied with. So this is sort of the open question for all Peirce scholarship, like what's the determination between the aspects of the science, and you have your
and
own.
which are the aspects and how many are of them. So my theory, starting from the most complex one, which is the relation between the sign, dynamic, object, and final interpretant, if you analyze all possible relations or dimensions among those fundamental aspects, which is the sign, dynamic, object, and interpretant, you get to 11 partitions. That's my theory. Peirce said 10, but he always left the possibility. He never said, well, there's only 10. He said, well, 10 is what I can analyze right now for what I have of life, the rest of my life. So I have few years of life, and I want to focus on those 10. But he never said that was on the only 10 or how many were they. I came to the idea that if we analyze from the most complex to the basic ones, you get to 11, not 10. And I have tried to describe all of them and how they relate to each other. They might be considered as monadic aspects, as dyadic relations between the monadic aspects, or triadic relations among some of the aspects. So that's my work, trying to build. Well, semiostasis comes when I realized that the teleological aspect of signification has a kind of influence, actually the kind of influence that we have already talked about during this meeting. So we know that law-like phenomena, they influence, or there's some level of determination on the contingent events of reality. So you have two fundamental levels. You have a level in which things are habitual, and you have levels near to the sensibility in which things are perceived. And those two levels, they meet, or they intersect in the middle. So you have law-like habits, such as a deduction. So you have the major premise, like all men are mortal, and you have the observational, perceptual level in which, hey, I'm seeing a man. Here's Socrates, he's a man. And then you have this intermediate. Well, if you're seeing a man, you know Socrates, and if he's a man, then he's mortal. So the solution between the two premises is always in the middle point. So you get the large predicate that is the attribute to the class. Once you get a member to that class, the larger attribute is projected onto the element of the class. So if there is mortality in all men, and if Socrates is part of the class of all men, then there is mortality in Socrates. I'm sorry, Socrates, you gotta be mortal. I don't have to kill you, but if the laws, if up to now mortality is a law that governs mankind, then you gotta be mortal. If from now on something happens and the laws change, and maybe some immortal people start to come up, then we have to revise the laws of nature. But from what we know, those laws of nature are projector, or they subsume what comes as contingent through our perceptions. So semiostasis, or this idea of semiostasis, comes exactly from how those general habits determine their contingent elements, how they subsume. So what I have found out is that there is a kind of feedback or back propagation from what is the teleological end of semiosis. So once you determine that there is a law-like phenomenon to happen, whatever happens in the end must be already determined in the dynamic phases of semiosis. So let me give you an example, maybe. So if you have, let's say, a law-like phenomena, like I'm dropping something to the earth. So if I drop something and there is a law of gravitation that governs that event, I must be certain, given that law of gravitation, that the end of the object that I have dropped is to be on the ground. So you see, so being on the ground is secondness. It is an event. Now, this event is determined by a law of causation that is governing the contingent event, me dropping a rock or a glass or any object. So you see that there is a sort of back propagation, the laws which are always in the future, because everything that is thirdness, everything that is law-like, is governing future events. So once you have a contingent events, those law-like abstractions, in somehow they are able to subsume and govern what's happening now. So this has been a kind of mystery throughout the history of philosophy. If you go to David Hume, how David Hume tried to explain, or not explain, but accept this idea that there are connections between causes and effects, how Kant tried to develop the transcendental philosophy, saying, well, actually, it's our mind that produces this. So somehow we are collecting, we are projecting a kind of net of causality, and those are a priori relations of space and time, and we are collecting those contingent informations from this projection. So we throw this net of causality and bring to our minds the effects of those nets. Well, what I'm saying is actually something different. What I'm saying is that future events have the possibility of governing actual contingent events. So there is some sort of a participatory universe in which future habits, once they become necessary secondness, they will produce downwards the ladder of sign aspects and determinations. They will produce secondness. So there is an interesting experiment in quantum mechanics. It's called the delay choice experiment. So when you have a propagation of a wave-like particle, and there is some sort of interference, and this interference produces a reduction of this wave-like particle into a single measured particle. So there is this delay choice in which you put a obstacle in the apparatus in the very end of the trajectory of the waves, and when you measured the measurement of the result produces a back propagation, and now you don't have waves interaction, but actually particles going to very specific paths. So it's proven that once you measure something, even after all the trajectory has been accomplished, once you measured, you produce a backwards propagation of this measurement, and reality is changed in the source. So they are not wave-like particles. They are well-defined particles. So what happens in the future determines, in some sense, the way information was produced at the beginning of the process. So what I'm saying with my semiostatic, or this idea of semiostatic phenomenon, semiostasis, is that happens all the time. It's not only something that we observe in fundamental particles, but actually in the whole universe. Future events may determine what we are experiencing right now. So there is a sort of backward propagation in the determination of the aspects of the sign when we have this axis of signification. So when you have secondness in, let's say, the relation between the sign and the final interpretant, once you have secondness there, then you must have secondness and the relation between the sign and the dynamic interpretant, because you cannot have something that will be an event as a final result if you don't have an actual event in the middle term. You see, so to have like a bullet hole in my wall, I must have a bullet that will produce the bullet hole. So I cannot have a bullet hole in my wall if I don't have a bullet that was shot to produce the bullet hole. So, and this happens in a meager way, in the way we produce our expectations of the future. So if you have an expectation that you will have a PhD degree, and this you are strong-headed, and you do everything in your efforts to pursue that PhD thesis and degree, then this futurity will act on your actual events, the way you act in your life, so that your actions right now, your contingent actions, are in a way determined by this strong idea of pursuing a PhD degree. Now, when we talk about mental habits, there's always a degree of fluctuations, and something may happen between now and then. But when we have the habits of nature, some habits that are very, very strong, then this causation going backwards, it's very deterministic. I wouldn't say totally deterministic, but the person once described how a hygrometer works. So you have this barometer or hygrometer. So if you have the laws of nature that are set to produce a storm tomorrow, because all humidity of the air, the pressure, and everything else is set up to produce a storm tomorrow. So this predictability of the storm will act on you right now, because you will act in the way that you are expecting the storm tomorrow, and things today will happen as to confirm the storm that is predicted tomorrow. You see? so this is idea that the futurity, so the in futuro,
Yeah.
something that is in the future, has some degree of determination in what happens now. But if you go to the sign aspects, you see that they work both ways. So if you have firstness in the end of the relations, then everything must be firstness. So if you have firstness in the most complex aspect, all the other aspect must be firstness because of the law of determination between them. If you have thirdness in the last aspect, then all the aspects must be thirdness, right? The thing gets interesting. Things get interesting when you have secondness in the aspects of the axis of signification. Then when you have secondness, all sort of different interesting things happen. And that's where semiostasis comes from, because it is this how secondness obliges semiosis to happen in a certain way, as to obey some certain laws, and at some point has some degree of openness to possible events. So it is between firstness and thirdness that interesting things happen. That's what we are doing now. We are between complete firstness and total thirdness, and systems behave in semiostasis in a dynamic equilibrium between those two extremum. You see?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So isn't this just, the philosophical idea of teleology, like the reality of teleology, that purposes and goals and aims, at least in some sense, constrain the possibilities of action, like in a very mundane example.
Exactly. But
if I want to,
how do we describe this in semiosis?
Yeah.
How do we express this in the Persis categories, in the very aspects? Because once you have this general idea,
okay. Yeah.
And now what we are saying is that we can look how things are happening. It's not just this general idea of teleology, but we are now seeing how those things happen in the perception, in the experience, in the understanding, and in communication. So we are describing, and this is very powerful, because if we study society or human subjectivity, and we are able now to describe how teleology is producing contingent events on those very different fundamental faculties of mind. Now, this is a very powerful tool in describing our mind and the way our societies, our collective minds work. And this is something that we know in general, but we never had the instruments to describe this in their very minute details. And maybe from that we can build something different, or we can understand layers of complexity of what's going on and act on those layers. I'm talking about, for instance, psychiatric diseases. So we know in general how our mind work, and we know how sometimes we build up expectations that are fancies, and we believe so much in those expectations, and we act as those expectations were real, and this is psychosis. So how do we explain psychosis or other psychiatric diseases from a purely semiotic relation among the aspects? And maybe this will bring tools to interfere or intervene in those very detailed aspects, and help philosophy of mind or psychiatrists to understand how our mind works, because since our mind is analogous to the mind of nature, so explaining how things happen will give us some insight of how we represent things in our minds.
Okay, that's very interesting. So semiostasis is very connected to teleology.
Yes,
Yes,
definitely, because
and
semiostasis
yeah,
is how thirdness is governing contingent. Because this thirdness, it is a future possibility. It is a expectation. At some point, this future possibility must be must collapse into real events, actual events. And
okay.
that's the collapse that semiostasis is governed. You have some loop that is going as a possible general purpose, and then at some point this general purpose must collapse into an actual event, and this actual event is a instantiation of the possibilities that were expressed in general terms by those future expectations. So once you understand how, and that's what cybernetics is about. If you think about theory of systems, uh, you know, Kubernetes means the pilot. So the guy who is driving in a nave, or it's a pilot. So
Yeah, yeah.
Kubernetes is the pilot. So the Kubernetes is the one who is driving the process. So if we think cybernetics as the science as of how laws govern the systems, so semiostasis is the same as homeostasis in living systems, but also allostasis, because semiostasis, it is a equilibrium. There is a very predictable way of describing the system. Allostasis describes habit breaking and habit taking. So allostasis shows how the laws of the system, they change themselves as to be more adapted to to the environment. So as semiostasis governs the behavior of the system, not taking into consideration changes, allostasis takes into consideration the need of changing the laws that govern the system as to produce more adaptability to the environment. And semiostasis describe habit breaking and habit taken, as well as how habits subsume contingent events, and how habits determined in a certain level of constriction of how events must obey some expectations. So through semiostasis, we might think our minds as prediction machines. So our minds are like prediction systems. We are always in this allostatic, homeostatic level of habit interplay, and we are always expecting reality to confirm what we are in the future expecting. And if this confirmation does not come as information or as impressions of our senses, then we have to either change reality, because now we are out of our comfort zone, there is some irritation. So we either change reality or we change our habits. So once your homeostatic system is collapsed, so once your semiostasis has collapsed, you have to produce new habits and achieve a new level of semiostasis. Otherwise, you will be at odds with the environment, with the reality. So you see, we always trying to to put thirdness into our processes. Thirdness is what governs our purposes. We are always trying to bring thirdness into our minds. Whenever we collapse and thirdness is not a good explanation of what's going on, we have to produce new conjectures, new habits. We have to try out new homeostasis, or we change the reality around us. So we go to the environment and change the environment so that our expectations are fulfilled.
Okay, so again, to think about a little bit the difference between humans and animals, we as human beings have a very developed, very abstract semiostasis, very like lots of layers of semiostasis above one another. And this is sort of saying that we form purposes of our own, like expectations of our own, or systems that will, I'm thinking about like society. Society is a thirdness in a sense. So society is our semiostasis that is controlling what we are doing. Like that's a
culture
sort of
is a collective illusion. So we can describe culture. So, but it is illusion that works. Yes, it is illusion, is a semiostasis, but it works for all.
And animals like ants, they build a lower kinds of, or not so complex kinds of semiostasis.
Their semiostasis is much more attuned with the semiostasis of the natural laws. So they're building semiostasis. They're very much connected with the semiostasis of the laws of nature. That's why they can live with their instincts, because they're so much connected with the semiostasis that goes around in the environment that their instinct, it's all they need to reproduce, to survive, and to keep going. Since we have much more layers of complexity, we don't want to ground our actions on instincts anymore. We detach ourselves from instinct, and we build a civilization, a culture, which are layers of semiostasis, of habits that will govern our behavior in a way that is not how our instincts would demand us to behave. So we detach ourselves.
So this gives us freedom to create all kinds of representations, often symbolic, like institutions and societies, religions, cultures, and so on. And it's a freedom. We can like create our own hallucinations, but at some level they must be representations of the real, because if they aren't, then there's going to be at some point an imputation of secondness that will break that hallucination.
Well, climate change, that's nature coming to, well, that's the bill. Okay, you've been playing around with your illusions. You had a lot of fun with your semiostasis. You built beautiful, wonderful stuff. But now there's a bill to be paid, and we must face that now. That's the secondness. So climate change, with all those climate disasters, this is secondness. This is nature saying, well, enough, it's enough. You've been playing around. You made So what do you want to do now? You want to go into on a rocket and build another life in Mars? That's what you want? That's your escapism? So that's your solution to the problem you've been creating around here? So no, you stay here. Now it's time to pay the bill. To pay the bill.
Yeah.
That's how semiostasis go. At some point, semiostasis, it will search the equilibrium. So we have been so much detached from the semiostasis of nature. Now things are collapsing, and we must find a equilibrium between the level of semiostasis that our culture is capable of producing, and the semiostasis that nature can afford.
So if you have the solenoid, the diagram of the solenoid, and there the semiostasis, they will build, like they go upwards, and the most abstract kinds of semiostasis are on the top, like symbolic communicational semiostasis. So if we have an imputation of secondness, do we fall down the solenoid? Like we had a very fluid communication with the environment. Everything was fluid. Everything went fine. Now it's a bit unclear. We are on the representation period, like what this means actually. I'm not sure what he's meaning with this thing. And if there is a very, very, very big imputation of secondness, then we can fall to the presentation period, like that we are just trying to perceive what is even this thing. And so okay.
Okay, so that because when nature talks to us through a disaster, natural disaster, now that's something that you perceive, and you don't understand what's going on immediately. So you have to process that. You see, you were going on your culture, so you had your nice car, nice house, internet connection. You have your closet or fashion like dresses. Everything is beautiful. You're going to the concert, and then there is a flute destroys everything, and your life is ruined. No, that's pure perception action cycle. You gotta survive. That's something tragic. So all those layers collapse, and now you have on a new level of interaction, perception, action, and now you have to build a new understanding of what's going on. So you see this wake-up call. So it goes all down in the ladder to the perception action level. So we've been doing this layers and layers of semiostasis, very abstract, and we kind of forget that we're animals and we have our instincts, and we can starve because we go to the supermarket. That's so much food there. How can one think that there's starvation? Because there's something at our disposal, because culture gives us this illusion, and at some point you don't have anything of that anymore, and you find yourself having to the instincts must be have a important role in your life. You that's the wake-up call. So maybe our civilization is having this process right now, a wake-up call. So levels and levels of abstraction of the semiostasis must be confronted with the reality of climate change, the temperature rising, and so on.
Yeah. So this is the collapse of semiostasis is the basic idea that we have a very functioning good society with a rich culture, and then it just collapses, like, the Empire of Rome, or sort of these movies about the apocalypse, like Mad Max. Suddenly it's just very savage, like primitive life without a developed culture, so on.
So what we have to choose is, can we during semiostasis change our habit breaking, habit changing? So we can do this in a way that it doesn't have to be so traumatic, disastrous. If we change our habits in a way, in an intensity, and quick enough so to avoid the complete collapse. So if we do that, we change our semiostasis without the complete collapse of the whole building, the whole system, you see? So we must change the way we communicate. So we must change. Through changing the way we communicate with nature and within ourselves, new representations will come up, and then changing the way those representations work, new sort of experiences will come up, and then new sort of perception actions will come up. So we don't go only to the perception action to communication, but we can go from communication to the perception action, because in the communication we have the sharing, controlling. In the comprehension, we have also the instruction. In the experience level, we have also the execution. And the perception level, we have also the action. So we can control what we instruct ourselves. We can instruct what we execute, and we can execute what we act. You see, there are those levels.
Yes.
Communication does not influence perception. Communication can only influence the way we comprehend things. But comprehension can influence the way we experience things. And experience can influence the way we perceive things. So you see, we have to go down the ladder step by step. Otherwise, the whole building collapses. If we don't do this in a very well-controlled manner, in which communication controls the comprehension, that controls the experience, that controls the perception, if we don't do this in scales, then things will collapse at once. So that's the only way we can change our own minds without dying or without experience the ultimate secondness, which is the end of history. That's, the ultimate secondness is game over. When nature says game over, that's the ultimate secondness. So there's nothing you can do anymore. It's game over. So before we get to that point that is total secondness, we might want to change through communication, controlled communication, how we represent and comprehend. How do we do that? So in comprehension, we have instructions. So we must instruct ourselves, our kids, new generations. So we must change the way we represent, instruct new sorts of representations, and that will bring about new sort of experiences, not the old way of experiencing things, but new ways of experiencing things. So we are changing the way we relate to the environment. That's what experience is about. So you see, there is hope that through semiostasis, we can change degree by degree, habit changing, habit taken, without the need of a complete collapse.
Yeah, and this is the other side of our freedom, is that the capability of self-controlled action and the full sort of, maybe not the full, but very great amount of self-determination of how we want to represent the world.
Yeah, responsibility and accountability. Yeah. We must know that we what we hope for has a cost, and we must account for those costs. Someone's got to pay for what we are pursuing in the kind of society. And do we want new generations to pay all the bill, or we want to start to pay some part of it right now? So that's the big question for our civilizations. We keep going on, just deniers. We deny that there is a problem and don't look up. You say keep going, never look to the sky because there's nothing coming towards us. Or do we face reality, start changing our habits, go all the way to the ladder of semiostasis, change our actions, and we deliver to the new generations a burden that is less heavy than the ones that they are getting right now?
Yeah. You talk about a little bit about the phases, and one development or change compared to your earlier work in this was the interpretation of the signs changed a little bit. And you write in your work that the mathematical structure, the formal structure, which we have talked about little here, the aspects and the semiostasis and phases and periods, these are the formal structure. But how we interpret them, like what if we produce the 66 signs, what are these 66 signs? And that develops all of the time, that is in constant change. And one of the biggest changes that I thought was that earlier you said that the whole perception action phase was unconscious. like every quali-sign, alter sign, and sin sign, when I get techie here again, were unconscious. But now that's changed. Like sin signs are actually conscious. So I think that's I find that's a very good development. That makes much more sense to me now. But
I was obliged to do that. I mean, that was not something. I mean, that was not something that I wanted, but that's how analyzing the structure and the periodic table. I had to face that actually the levels of consciousness, you don't draw a neat line between unconscious and conscious, but there is this continuous process of becoming conscious. So Percy sometimes he talks about the bottomless lake. There's this metaphor in which what is not conscious, it is in the bottom of this bottomless lake, and at some point through denotation, some things comes to the surface, and we denote them as secondness because they are now at the surface. We do not understand them fully, but they are already knocking at our doors. Now, sin signs are exactly what they're doing. They're surfacing, so they're not totally conscious, like a concept that I'm aware of. And there's a lot of mental habit and beliefs involved in a concept. But secondness, it is already something that is forcing. It is a level of consciousness that we must acknowledge. So secondness is not totally unconscious, because if it was totally unconscious, we would not process it and change our habits. So at some point, we must be conscious that there's a wake-up call here. Someone is knocking on the door. So you got to do something about it. So this is a level of necessary secondness, conscious secondness, that must come into play. So if you want to represent and communicate with reality, otherwise we live in our own internal subjective world. So you know what I mean? So if we do not accept the consciousness as something that is forcing upon us, and we know that something is forcing us, then we just say, well, I don't believe, I don't want to know, go away. I keep going with my internal life because I'm happy with it. You see, so there is a level of necessary friction between our unconscious internal life and the consciousness of reality. And this is the very main brain that allows information to come into our internal systems.
Yeah, because now before it was like almost all of the sin signs were sort of useless in many cases because these are all unconscious signs and stuff like that. But now it seems like sin signs communicate, that they can hold information much more than previously, and they are signs that communicate by or through perception, by embodying certain qualities. They
Perfect.
don't.
No, you said it all. Exactly
Yeah.
that. Sin signs, they embody quali signs as much as indexes embody icons. So icons are embodied in index. So there is a brute expression. It is not a thoughtful expression, because you gotta have other layers of semiostasis to bring acknowledgement on those processes. But nevertheless, those processes are expressing and representing and expressing signs. And those are important constituents of ourselves or any semiotic process. So in the beginning, I was thinking that there was this very, since we are talking about firstness, secondness, and thirdness, I thought, well, there must be a necessary gradation between you go from firstness to secondness, and then from secondness to thirdness.
Yeah.
That was my initial idea when I started to develop the descriptions of the signs and everything else. Now I have a different approach, because I think those are three universes. They are interplay among them, but you don't have to have a secondness to have thirdness. You can have thirdness independently of secondness. So the reality of thirdness, as much as the reality of firstness and the reality of secondness, although they're interplaying, they are independent sort of universes. So there is thirdness that is, in some sense, it is attracting. That's why the word attractor is interesting here, because in some sense, thirdness, it is a kind of attractor that is pushing or sucking towards itself the expression of firstness, of secondness. So it is as much, it's almost like semiostasis wants a body, you see? So semiostasis is a very law-like disposition, expectation, future probability, but it wants a body. It wants to be embodied in particular events, in particular minds, in scene signs, and it wants blood, which is the icons. So the icons bring those nutrients, and the skeleton brings the body. So you see the flesh. So thirdness, it is eager to be embodied in reality. That is something that I was not aware in my previous understanding. I thought that, well, thirdness, it is a very placid environment where ideas are like in heaven, very peaceful, crystallized. No, ideas, they are hungry. Ideas, they are eager. They're little monsters. They want bodies, So they are pushing towards themselves those bodies, the embodied qualities. And that's how the universe is working.
Yeah, because this was something that I also found out, that if you think about how the universe began, it wasn't that first there was a quali sign, and then it became an alter sign, and then it became a sin sign, and so on.
But one thing goes another, it's sequential. That was
there were all the 66 signs from the beginning.
Yes, well, you said it all. It took me many years to acknowledge that. Because no. We got to start with the 1, then we go to the 2, then I realized, well, no, it is actually, because thirdness, it is a possibility, is a general possibility, it has a potentiality, and it must have been at the beginning. Otherwise, there was no universe. So all three categories were there at the very beginning. So you don't start with firstness and then comes secondness, and then there is a synthesis and then thirdness. No. They are embodied. They might be embodied in this way through propositions and assertions and communications, but actually to have this process going on from the start, you gotta have the three universal categories. They are all there, and you have qualities. Qualities just want to be original. They are not. They don't want. They don't want to care about anything. And secondness, they just want to be expressed. They want to express. So they demand qualities to be embodied so they can express it themselves. They need the blood of firstness. But then thirdness, they want to be embodied. They want bodies. So you see, all those three categories, they must be around to have a full-fledged universe or a full-fledged mind working. And that's what the novelty of my new approach in this thesis. Now, I know that there is this what I call the graphils
Yeah.
and the graphist. So the graphist is like the secondness trying to express its sensuality, and then you have this graphils that wants to put order into this expression and wants some rationality, and it wants a body for itself. So it wants to bring secondness into its realm as a replica. So I get you, Sinsign, and now you are my slave as a replica. You're gonna replicate my ideas. You see, so there is this. Uh, well, I'm putting some colorful ideas because this is a very loose conversation. But in the bottom, that's what's
Yeah.
going on. So
Yeah.
you have thirdness demanding secondness to be subsumed. What is
Yeah.
to be subsumed? Is to be enslaved. So secondness must come into grounds with the laws and become a replica, as much as qualities must be embodied in secondness. So you have this first movement that is the graphist expressing its sentiments, its qualities. And then you have this thirdness that is trying to bring those expressions to some meaningful habits and expressing them as replicas, metonyms, and inductions. So, sort of all the energy that is springing from firstness and embodied through secondness is then being put into a rest of replicas, metonyms, and inductions. So that's kind of the end of inquire, you see. So that's what we want. We want habits that would not be disturbed as easily. So we would like our habits to live peacefully without being broken by novelty. But not what novelty wants. Not novelty wants to pop up. Novelty wants to come into play and say its thing. It wants to express. And how does novelty express itself? Being embodied through secondness. You see? So this is how semiosis is always, that's the movement. So those three universes are always in interplay. And that's how new habits are being born and being broken, and secondness come into play, and new qualities pop up. And that's what we are experiencing right now. New ideas, new habits of ideas, and new conjectures, new hypotheses, new inductions. That's life.
Yeah. 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 It's this simultaneous movement of novelty and creation, which is then which thirdness tries to bring into harmony, into a generality. So this is the story of life, like how the nature develops. It starts pretty simple, but then novelty pops up, but it doesn't end in a chaos, but as to an ecosystem or an ecology. And that's the same with our human society. It gets more and more complex, but it creates then new cultural spheres. And, it's not a chaos out there. The traffic functions, nevertheless.
Yeah, Peirce, in his early versions of semiosis, he was saying that there is this end which would be a crystallized habit. But then he changes in the end. And I think I have done the same thing, because then he writes about the perfect sign. So the perfect sign is a sign in which firstness, secondness, and thirdness are in equal quantities. So there is firstness popping up. So there is this secondness that is putting concreteness to firstness, and then you have habits breaking in and habits taking that are bringing those things into harmony. So entelekia, which is the perfection in Greek, intellectia is like the perfect telos. For Peirce, in his late years, the intellectia is the very movement of habit breaking, habit taking. And so there's not a complete crystallized universe at the end, not a complete chaotic firstness universe at the end, but we have this equilibrium between those three universes that would be the perfect telos, the perfect semiosis, in which all three universes are in equilibrium.
I think in your PhD you said that the argument is the entelechia, but now you're saying that the 66 signs is the entelechia.
But the argument involves all of them. So you must not forget that
well, that's true.
The argument actually has inside it. It's like a doll, a Russian doll. It has all the others. So the argument is the intellectia because it is involving all sorts of firstness, all sorts of secondness, and it is all in this interplay. So the argument is the whole solenoid in action. The whole solenoid is in movement. All phases are being productive. All periods are alive. And that's how what's going on in the universe. That's how we describe the universe. There are laws, there's novelty, there are concrete events, concrete objects that are perceived, and all those three universes are in interplay.
Yeah. I read through all the 66 signs, the examples, and they were very good. I liked how they are. Many of them have to do with our digital age and social media. I really like that.
I tried to bring up examples so I could explain those things to young generations. My students, they are very much into those social media, and sometimes I'm talking about semiosis and giving always examples that are the ants and the bees and the bats. And they're okay.
Smoke.
I don't want to talk about ants and bees and bats. I want to see what's going on in my Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. Yeah. So I'm trying to bring examples from those digital lives, so semiosis can be more understandable to young generations, and also to explain how communication develops, because we are using those layers of communication to develop semiosis. So that's actually semiosis is producing those layers, because semiosis is saying, well, we have reached to a level in our interaction, analogical interaction. Now we want another layer of semiostasis, another layer of illusions, of fancies, which is the digital sphere. And that's what's going on. We are confirming our own prejudices, conjectures, and hypotheses in this bubbles of interaction, symbolic interactions that we call social media. So
it's a hallucination in a hallucination.
Yeah, exactly. Levels of hallucination. There's a movie about that. So a dream out of a dream out of a dream.
Yeah, exactly. That's semiostasis for you. But there were a couple of ideas that I've been pondering, and now you made them more clear. Like the scene signs or the perception action phase are signs that signify through perception, through being somewhere, that we see what they signify in a sense,
and they express, because you have the perception and the action. Right now we are both perceiving and acting. I would not be moving my lips, my tongue, and putting my breath, because those are actions, and I'm perceiving what I get from your reactions what I get from the screen of my computer and everything. So you see, there's always this cycle of perception, action,
Yeah.
but this is governed by experience. And so experience governs our perception, action. That's why I don't have to think every time I move my finger, because experience is doing that for me, and I am thankful for the way I have developed my experiential habits. So most of the things that I do are governed by habits that come from my previous experiences. And so experience influences perception. Now, comprehension does not influence perception. Comprehension influences experience. You see? So we cannot govern directly our perceptions. So I cannot govern my perceptions through my communication, for instance. But actually, there are all those levels of interactions with we call the periods and phases. So those periods and phases that are close to each other, they influence each other. But those that are separated, they do not influence each other directly. You must influence what is in between them. So the influence is mediated by the period and the phase that is between them.
Yeah. And then in the experience execution phase, the signs that we perceive or perceived, they do not signify true perception, but they are sort of loaded with meaning.
Exactly.
Like we see beyond the mere perception of that sign, and we see, oh, this is a word. This is just not ink on a paper. It's a word.
Experience is a continuum of a perception. So when you go to experience, you have already a layer of thirdness that is attracting you towards the period and the phases of experience. So you're not on the level of perception, action anymore. So we can describe cognitive capacities when we put together phases and periods. We can classify of find a taxonomy of capacities, cognitive capacities. And that's an interesting exercise. Like we've been talking about ants and bees and bats and all. So if we talk about a worm of a insect or a virus or a bacteria or a bee or a spider, we can classify their levels or their capacities of cognition using the interconnection or between the phases and periods. And I think this is an interesting exercise for biosemioticians. That's an article I want to write, a taxonomy of cognitive capacities that will allow biosemioticians to study how biosemiosis happen in different realms of living beings and classify the level of complexity using those taxonomies.
And then another very interesting from a sociological perspective was the idea that in our particular minds, only particular signs can instantiate. So in a sense, the phase of comprehension and communication are inherently social. They cannot be instantiated in particular minds.
Exactly.
Yeah,
that was another step that was hard for me to do.
yeah, I can imagine.
but as a semiotician, I was analyzing the diagram and say, well, that's what the diagram is telling me. And I have to extract the consequences of the diagram and put it to proof and see that if that works or not, if the diagram is completely off track, if I am bringing up a completely off-track interpretation. But what I found by analyzing the diagram is that individually, we don't have true symbols or true beliefs. We have only metaphors or metonyms. So we have imperfect in the sense that it has not reached the intellectia, because the perfection is the intellectia. So those are imperfect symbols or imperfect indices. Like if I look at my watch, a clock on my wall, and I see what time it is, actually it is an imperfect index, because I cannot tell if the clock has stopped, if the clock is not working anymore, if someone has messed up with my clock just to play with me. So you see, when you see a clock, actually, your belief comes from this expectation that, well, for all purposes, I should hold this belief that the clock is working well, that no one has played with it. So you see, it's always an imperfect index. I must confront that information in social realm. So it is by acting socially that that information of what sort of time I'm gathering from my observation of the clock, if that works, if that is correct. So I always have to confront that index with all indexes that are around me, and this brings this community, this sociality to the front plate. So we cannot be totally sure of our indexical information as particular minds. So we don't have actually indexes. We have ergosims. Ergosims are imperfect references. So they are references that we take as indexes for all practical purposes, but they must be confirmed as the final interpretant, or the relation of the final interpretant with the sign. So you see, there must be a sort of confirmation in the future, and this futurity, this confirmation in the future must be social, because otherwise I'm always within my own mind, and I never leave those imperfect signs. If I want to reach some degree of perfection, I must submit me to the laws of nature that is around me, or the laws of social living, in which we debate our opinions, we confront our perceptions, and in some sense we get a final result.
Yeah, this connects very well with Peirce, what Peirce writes in his writing, that logic needs a community, and a logical inquirer must subsume himself to the community and must be self-sacrificing towards this unlimited community. So this is a nice connection.
Individuality is ignorance.
Yeah.
Individuality is ignorance. And that's what I'm saying, because if you look to your clock and you think you know what time it is, actually you do not know for sure. And if you are absolutely sure, someday you will be in a bad situation, because at some point that clock will not work, at some point something will happen. So you see, so we must always hold a degree of humble doubt on our own information, internal information, and we must resort to a social meaning of information, and that's how we build layers of assurance, layers of assurance of what sort of information we are gathering.